and I'd like to pay my respects too. Welcome everybody. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces and names in the viewing box there, and also some new ones. So welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time to find out a little bit more about our response in Haiti. As you will all know, Haiti was struck by a very powerful 7.2 earthquake on the 14th of August. And I know from the personal correspondence I've got, a lot of people didn't know about this until they got an appeal letter from us and email. And unfortunately, the media attention was not as high as it normally would have been, and we're overshadowed by COVID is fully dominating the news here in Australia, and of course events in Afghanistan really took the spotlight away from what was happening in Haiti. Not long after that earthquake, a tropical storm Grace came over the island and dumped more than a foot of rain on top of people who had already lost their homes. And so the scale of this disaster, although not as big as the terrible 2010 earthquake, is still very significant. And over 130,000 homes have been damaged, and hundreds of thousands of people affected. So this was our first emergency appeal for a very long time. So those of you familiar with ShelterBox, we pride ourselves on the speed of our response. But since the advent of COVID, some 18, 20 months ago, we've been restricted to responding remotely. We haven't had the ability to deploy our teams of staff and volunteers. And therefore, we've had to find partners in the countries that we're working with. And it takes a little time to do the due diligence on those partners and work out a way of how we're going to work. Now, I'm really proud to say that ShelterBox has done a fantastic job in working through that COVID period. And last year we helped over 40,000 families. So that's really a figure that we can be very proud of when we haven't actually been able to deploy a team, and we've had to do everything remotely, including training of partner organizations on the ground. So when this earthquake hit, the operations team in the UK made a very swift decision that we were going to respond, and due to the fact that the UK and the US are a little bit further in their COVID journey than we are, they were able to announce that they could deploy a team for the first time in 18 months. Now this, for those again who are familiar with the organization, as we like to react swiftly, launching an appeal when the news is hot and the issue is hot, it really helps us in the fundraising department. And I'm really thrilled to say that we've raised over $100,000. There's probably another $30,000 or $40,000 come in this month, and I think that's a really great figure. That 100,000 there, last month we had 50,000 from Rotary clubs and 50,000 from Rotarians, and an added $20,000 from other individuals. So the support from Rotary cannot be overestimated. The purpose of tonight's webinar is to really sort of explain how we're working in Haiti, how it differs from previous response. So this will be our 5th response in Haiti. The first one was back in 2010 for the massive earthquake, and I'm just going to illustrate in a minute how this response differs from that one 11 years ago. We've managed to find a great partner in Habitat for Humanity, who we've worked with on several occasions and different responses most recently a really successful response in Honduras following Hurricane Eta. And we worked with Habitat in Honduras, along with the Rotary Club of San Pedro Sula, and managed to help 2,000 families in that response. So we've got a team in the region. I'm not sure if there are actually any team in Haiti, but Henry will be able to update us on that in a minute. But we've got a logistics team into Dominican Republic, which neighbors Haiti, and they've been in contact with Habitat, who are doing needs assessments and sort of assess what aid we will need. Now, I'm going to just show you the importance now of partnerships and how it's been part of our DNA for a long time, and just give you a comparison of working in 2010 and working in 2021. So this image here is from just outside of Port-au-Prince, 2010. There's a few ShelterBox response team members there with myself, and we were working with the Miami University Field Hospital. In this case, we're setting up a isolation camp for people with TB, and obviously a lot of medical facilities had been destroyed. The university medical team set up a really big camp and a field hospital. We actually stayed in the grounds of the field hospital and worked very closely with these guys. And we also supplied tents for outpatients and people who were coming out of pretty serious operations, places where they could isolate and be safe. And like I say, this one here for with people with TB, so they weren't spreading to the wider population. So we work with a huge variety of partners in 2010. And again, those of you familiar with the history of ShelterBox will know that 2010 response was ShelterBox's biggest response to date, with over 28,000 families helped, mostly with our signature shelter boxes, because back then that's pretty much all we had. In some occasions there, in fact, the isolation camp, we had non-ShelterBox tents because we ran out of ShelterBox tents fairly quickly, and then we had to import tents direct from the factory in China. But over a period of 12 months, let's say 28,000 families were helped. And we worked with everybody from, like here, with community groups that basically approached us, and we would sort of work with them and local charities and NGOs to find suitable places to put tents, to make sure that they organize their own security. Security was a big thing in Haiti, and I'm sure Henry will touch on that when he talks to you in a minute. But one of the buildings affected by that 2010 earthquake was the maximum security prison, and there were over 600 inmates let loose. Some of the worst murderers, rapists, and drug dealers were out and about causing havoc. And so every camp that's set up had to have its own security. A lot of that sourced from local people setting up their own patrols and what have you. This image here was working with Médecins Sans Frontières, and they obviously had a lot of local staff, and they also had a local presence before the earthquake. So these types of partners are ideal because they have that local knowledge, and they know the communities that we're working with. This particular camp here, the people were basically sleeping under cotton sheets put on bits of stick. That was the only cover they had, was like barely keeping them out of the midday sun and totally ineffective against rain. So working with MSF, we got everybody those full shoulder boxes. They also got hygiene kits from MSF, and the MSF looked after the camps. We did that distribution about 4:30 in the morning, just before dusk, when all the rowdies were asleep, and we managed to do that with little or no security. And then this distribution was something different, was right in the center of town, and we were assisted by the 82nd Airborne, who had been diverted from going to Afghanistan, and they came and helped, not us, but many NGOs there. And this was a much more of a sort of high security, high risk distribution, but certainly, again, very effective working in the city. So, like I say, partnerships are essential to what we do. And like I also said, like shelter boxes were pretty much, that was our stock in trade. And that's all we had. Now we've evolved since then. We have a lot more items in our inventory, and the Haitian government, have said that they prefer not to have tents this time. There can be problems caused by tents, especially with land ownership and what have you. So I'm going to hand over now to Henry. He's going to give you a bit of an overview of the differences with this deployment and past deployments in Haiti. And Henry joined ShelterBox 3 years ago as part of the Major Gifts team in the fundraising department, and 12 months ago switched over to the operations. So he's got a good overview of not only what works on the ground, but what works to fund what works on the ground. So please welcome Henry, and thank you for joining us this morning, your time.
Thanks, Mike. That's really kind. Just hoping everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, cool. Thanks everyone for having me. It's really a real pleasure to join you all here today. Yeah, I was kind of brought along just to describe some of the main differences, I guess, in terms of how we are responding to Haiti now versus how we were responding to Haiti back in 2010. And some of the differences, particularly within Haiti itself, and within this response, specifically. So there are three main challenges that have appeared in this response that weren't necessarily present in the previous response to such a degree. So they essentially they are the security situation in Haiti now is very different to how it was back in 2010. Secondly, COVID-19 is around now and presents a whole load of different challenges and issues and concerns. And then thirdly is that we're currently in the middle of the hurricane season. So let me start with that one. So in the middle of the hurricane season, as Mike mentioned at the start, Hurricane Grace hit Haiti almost immediately after the earthquake did, causing landslides, flooding, and again, further destruction to the vulnerable communities. So that was a challenge in itself. We couldn't deploy immediately because of that risk that Storm Grace gave. So we had to sort of slightly delay the response in terms of getting out there just because of that. Also, we're right in the middle of hurricane season in the Caribbean, so it runs usually between August and October as the main area. So we're constantly monitoring for all hurricanes that are sort of cropping up in that region, and ensuring that our teams that are deployed are as safe as possible. So we're trying to track them as early as we can to let the team know any risks that might be present. On top of that, it's an earthquake situation. As with any earthquakes, there are always aftershocks. Although the aftershocks are now nearly finished, or they're much smaller than they were, within the first week of the earthquake, there were over 600 aftershocks in the region. So again, can definitely pose a serious issue for teams that are deploying there. So on top of that, we then have the security situation. So in 2010, there were security concerns within Haiti, as Mike mentioned, a few of them. Since then, the situation has got dramatically worse. especially in and around Port-au-Prince, which is the capital of Haiti. It's sort of parts of it are really run by gang lords, and there's gang activity and serious crime happening everywhere. In terms of some of the most serious stuff, 10% of all kidnappings in the whole North America and Caribbean region happen within Haiti. So that poses a serious problem for any teams we might want to deploy. And sort of we need to think through how we can overcome that issue and mitigate that issue. So so it's definitely a big risk sending a team there in the first place. And we've kind of got around it in certain ways. We've ensured time spent in Port-au-Prince is actually at a minimum. So the team is largely based down in the southwest, the earthquake struck area, or in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. So we kind of are switching between those two with as little time as possible spent in Port-au-Prince, just because of the security situation. However, as that's where the main port is and the airport for getting aid in, our team does need to go there occasionally to sort out logistics and as a more of a central hub. And then finally, in terms of major challenges that the team are facing now, or the response is facing now, compared to 2010, is COVID-19. So that, as you know, this is our first response since COVID-19 started. So we've really had to make sure that everything we're doing is properly thought through and considered, and we need to take in mitigations to prevent not only our teams from getting COVID-19, but our teams who are going to the field passing it on to people, local people within Haiti, and that's our priority. So every time our teams are taking flights, we're ensuring they take PCR tests. There isn't an entry requirement into Dominican Republic, for instance, to take PCR tests, but we're ensuring that our teams do so both after they, but before they get on the plane, but also after they arrive, so they're not contracting anything during transit. And then they're taking lateral flow tests every couple of days. Each member of the team is. And then every time they move between one place and another, they take another lateral flow test. So from Port-au-Prince down to La Caille, where the earthquakes hit, and where our teams spent a lot of their time, they'll take PCR tests and lateral flow tests there. One of the things that's of real consideration is in Haiti at the moment, because of the earthquake, especially down in the southwest region, the hospitals are not only of really low quality, but a lot of them are damaged, and a lot of them were overrun by people who had suffered in the earthquake. So when we were deploying a team, thinking about, well, what happens if one of our team members gets ill? How will we kind of get them out of that zone? All of these things kind of formulate in our minds when we're thinking about deploying a teams, and all these risks have been considered. So yeah, it's definitely been a very challenging response so far, with lots and lots of moving parts and lots to consider and lots of complexity. In terms of where we're at now, so we have just deployed our second team out to the region. So our first team have spent about 3 weeks there now. As I mentioned, they spent some time in Dominican Republic in Santo Domingo. They spent the first week there talking with our partners, Habitat for Humanity. And then they moved across to Haiti, down to the southwest area of La Caille, where they were in the field talking with our partners and sort of constructing the project and getting down to the project details of who will support, how will support, what the most appropriate aid items, conducting training with the partner, for example. Since then, they've moved back to Port-au-Prince for a few days because aid arrived in country over the weekend. So we have about 2,000 kits worth of aid items in country now. They're just waiting to be repackaged into family kits in the warehouse so that they can be ready for distribution. When they come, they sort of arrive in containers full of just a pallet of shelter kits and a pallet of kitchen sets and a pallet of mosquito nets. We then take them into warehouses and break them down into family kits. Team 2 arrived a couple of days ago into the Dominican Republic, and they have about 2 days handover with Team 1 and Team 2. So Team 1 have now moved back to the Dominican Republic, where they're doing that handover with the team, before the team then move back into Haiti, back into La Caille for distributions and further work with a partner for monitoring and evaluation following the response. Yeah, that's probably a general oversight of where we're at now. Mike, is that okay? Is there any other further questions you got at the moment, or I can wait till questions later come in the session?
Thanks, Henry. That's a really good overview, and like you say, I think you did a really good job of showing the complexity. These things are never simple, and the fact that we've worked there before does give us some good ideas of the challenges, but the things change all the time. And yeah, I'd just like to add to that security situation. Sadly, one of the guys featured in that first photograph from the Miami Field Hospital, he was actually killed in Haiti in 2010 at an ATM, robbed at gunpoint and shot. And you know, so those dangers are real. And one of our major jobs is to remain safe and not become part of a problem. So thanks very much, Henry. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions from our viewers.
So I've had a couple of questions sent directly to me, which I thought we could start with. Couple of good ones, I thought. How long does ShelterBox expect to be in the region? And how many families are they hoping to support? I don't know who fancies answering that question.
I can take that one, Mike, if you want. Yeah, so we'll be in the region. So our second team is probably the last team that we'll deploy in terms of in this response. So they'll be there for another 3 weeks or so, doing kind of working through deploying the distributions, but also working with the partner to develop questions for the surveys afterwards to make sure that all the aid has been appropriate. And then second part of the question, yeah, about 2,000 households worth, 2,000 families.
So do we have any questions? If you have any questions, feel free just to put your microphone on. Kit has sent me another one. How do you pick your teams? That's a really cool question. And so I will hand that over to one of you again.
Yeah, happy to take this one again, Mike. It's a complicated process. So we have a really amazing kind of roster of volunteers that we can pick from, and we have staff members as well who we also can pick from. So a really good large roster of people. The challenge this time is because it's COVID-19, we've really tried to make sure that we're sending those, and because of the security concerns raised, we've really tried to pick sort of the most experienced team members we can. And yeah, so in fact, one of the people in the photo that Mike showed earlier, Dave, he's the team lead, and he's probably done more deployments with ShelterBox than anyone else in the organization, I think. So yeah, experience is a really key part. Also, because it's been such a long time since we've deployed teams, we've had to conduct further training to make sure everyone's kind of back up to speed with how we do things, our processes, safety, security awareness, first aid, things like that. So out of everyone who's sort of on that roster, there's a few people who have gone through those training most recently, and they've also been, that's also one of the key considerations. So we're sending the most experienced team with the most relevant and up-to-date training.
Cool, that's great to know.
There's a caveat to that as well. So Australian response team members are obviously restricted in their travel, and I think anyone traveling overseas from Australia at the moment has to go away for a period of 3 months. That makes it very hard for a volunteer, and then they also have to come back. When they get back, they have to quarantine at their own expense for a further 2 weeks. So like currently it's just not realistic to be deploying Australian response team members, and hopefully as our vaccination rates rise and and the restrictions change, then hopefully that will change early next year.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a very tricky time here, Henry, in Australia. It's it's very different to what it's like in the UK. You guys have been through it hard, and now you're able to start moving, but we're all still very much landlocked in Australia. So we do have some brilliant questions coming through. Peter sent a historical question, which I think we might go to Mike about. Thanks, Peter. So how many shelter boxes were sent to Haiti in the first response, or the big one in 2010? Do you know how many boxes went over there?
Yeah, well, approximately 28,000. It was our biggest and longest deployment, and a lot of that was probably due to a lot of funding came from the US that was specifically for Haiti, and the need was just persisted. So normally we would respond within the emergency phase, which is normally up to 3 months. Now in Haiti, after 3 months, then there were still hundreds of thousands of people who didn't have adequate shelter. So we stayed there a lot longer. It mostly was ShelterBox. In some cases, it was family camping tents. Literally, when we couldn't get our hands on enough of our own tents, then we had to learn how to put up others without instructions fairly quickly.
Cool, thank you, Mike. Thanks for that insight. Lucy is here with us today. Lucy's one of our response team members in Australia. Big thank you to Lucy for joining us. We've got a question here. Let's send it over to you, Henry. So Lucy's just saying, thank you for the information that you've already given us this evening. What you were saying earlier, does that mean that all of the aid is now in the country that we're expecting to deploy? Is the aid already there and kind of getting ready to be packaged out?
Yes, correct. We sent it over in 2 tranches. So the first one arrived on Friday and the second one arrived on Saturday, but took a little bit longer to get through customs than the first one. But both are now in a warehouse in Port-au-Prince and being broken down now, ready for distribution. The only caveat to that is we're still working on providing an additional element to the response, which is very new for us, which potentially around complementary cash assistance to go with some of the aid items. But again, that's still in discussion with both the internal team and with Habitat for Humanity.
Cool. And Kieran's also asked a question here. Do you know if will Habitat for Humanity continue to deploy ShelterBox aid once ShelterBox leaves, once the teams leave, or is the plan to kind of deploy all of the aid while our teams are in the country?
So yes, the Habitat team will be deploying our aid or distributing our aid. We're hoping that we can get all distributions done quickly, as quickly as possible, and we also have to be considerate of it being done discreetly. So over the next few weeks, just due to the safety security situations, we're hoping to keep distribution sites fairly small and localized. So that might extend the time frame beyond the team actually being in country. And whether the team is directly involved in those distributions will depend on the security situation of those locations at time of distribution.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Mina, welcome today. Thank you for joining us this evening. Maybe one for Mike here. How do you recruit volunteers? So we've heard about how we've kind of chosen the volunteers for this deployment, but in general, how do we recruit volunteers? And let's kind of maybe edge that towards, I suppose, our response team volunteers, Mike.
Yeah, sure. Look, normally, pre-COVID, every 2 years we would have open a window of recruitment here down in Australia, New Zealand, and southern Asia and the Pacific. Unfortunately, COVID's kind of put a stick in the spokes for our recruitment, and we've actually got 5 candidates that underwent a fairly lengthy selection process that are still waiting to do their pre-deployment training. But it is quite elongated process. It starts with an online situational awareness test, and those that sort of pass that are then offered to submit their application in writing, and then may perhaps offered an interview, and post-interview, those that deemed suitable will then go on a 4-day selection course where you're sort of put through the ringer a little bit, put under pressure, see how you work as a team, see how you work when you're tired, and you're assessed by the training team and current response team members, who it's almost like being on a reality TV show where every move is watched and notes are taken. And then those lucky people that are deemed suitable for the response team then have a sort of 50 to 100 hours of pre-reading on humanitarian systems and all other relevant information before they go a 10-day pre-deployment training course. So and it doesn't end there. So once you've done that and you've completed your pre-deployment course, then you're not really a response team member until you've done your first deployment. And then in between, then there's a monthly webinar for all response team members to not only brush up on your existing skills, but learn new skills, because things move fairly quickly in the sector, and we want to make sure that we are the most professional that we can be. So look, at the moment, it's very unlikely that recruitment is going to open up for at least probably another 6 months. But if you're subscribed to the newsletter, we do announce when recruitment's open. It tends to be a short window. So if this is something that you're interested in, keep an eye out. We will let you know via the newsletter, via Facebook, etc., and get your application in.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And if there's anyone on the call who is, really interested in, becoming a ShelterBox response team member in the future, feel free to just send me a message here. I'm actually under Mike tonight, just to confuse all of you. But just send me a message here, and we can put your name to the side when applications open. We can send you a message. Okay, so many questions. Thank you so much to everyone. Lisa from the book club, I think, she's a great question here. Underlying geology means Haiti will continue to experience earthquakes. Does ShelterBox have a long-term strategy for this? Who wants to take that question?
Very, very happy to take this one, Mike. Yes is the answer. We have currently, or over the past couple of years, been developing our Latin America and the Caribbean preparedness strategy. We have a bunch of team members on staff who are essentially looking very specifically at this. I'm one of those team members. So with that kind of Caribbean, Latin America focus, Haiti falls into that. And actually, what we're seeing now with this response is that preparedness work being enacted in real time. So part of that work is the partnership the strong partnership that we have with Habitat for Humanity, the international organization, and then how quickly we've been able to establish a partnership with Habitat for Humanity Haiti, who have the resources and staff on the ground to support a response of this nature. Sometimes the time frame on these types of things, especially given the security considerations for Haiti in particular, could be much longer if it wasn't for this preparedness work. We also have our pre-positioning hub for aid items in Panama, so we can respond really quickly from Panama to anywhere in the Latin American Caribbean region. So yeah, it both relates to the geology of Haiti. It's also due to the nature of the Caribbean hurricane season, but also sort of the instability in Southern and Central America at the same as well. So yeah, that's the reason the Caribbean is a real focus for us at the moment.
Awesome. I think that was a good response. Thank you, Henry. Lisa, if you have any further questions, though, please shoot them into the chat. We have a couple of questions here, which I think we might kind of be able to answer in one. Valerie, thank you for sending a message. And Valerie also just wants to thank you, Henry and Mike, for your insights tonight. So what's the kind of total cost around about of this deployment? And I suppose this is, we could also maybe merge these questions. Peggy, thank you for sending a question in as well. There's obviously 130,000 homes that have lost. We're helping 2,000 families. So is that because other aid agencies are also helping, or do we have a lack of funding? So maybe first we go for Valerie's question about the cost of the deployment, and then we can edge into Peggy's question about why just 2,000 families.
Yeah, I can take this one again, Mike, if you want. The rough cost of the response as a whole is about £500,000 sterling. I'm not sure of the conversion.
It's about $1 million,
there, but,
$1 million roundabouts.
Right, yeah. So that is actually towards the higher end of a cost per household for us as an organisation. The main reason for this kind of more expensive is because we've sent aid into the country via plane, because the port for shipping, which is much cheaper, the area around that is actually completely run by gangs. And also there's blockages at the ports and delays there anyway. So we've decided to in the interest of getting aid to the people who need them as soon as possible, we've flown the aid into the country to really speed up that process, which costs, or can cost, up to 10 times more than shipping it in. In terms of why we're only supporting 2,000 families instead of 130,000, so that's a really great question. Other agencies are working in the country and supporting a lot of households. One of the deciding factors for us was the amount of aid items that we had pre-positioned in Panama. So at the time, we only had about 2,000 roughly. Well, in fact, we had much less than 2,000 households worth of aid. We've had to procure and purchase other stock from other organizations and other warehouses in the region to sort of boost that up, so we can provide a comprehensive package to everyone. So although it's 2,000 families, that's 4,000 tarpaulins, that's 6,000 sleeping mats and other items. It takes quite a lot to bring it all together and then send it on. We are targeting some of the most vulnerable and rural families within the region, some of those that will have been overlooked by other organizations. So yeah, we're really targeting sort of those who fit the most vulnerable category within those affected by the earthquake as well. Hopefully that's provided a bit of an answer for that part of the question.
Thank you. I think it has, Henry. But of course, Peggy, if you have any more questions like that, do let us know. Actually, Peggy has got a second question here. So how are local Rotary clubs helping? We know that our clubs here in Australia are absolutely instrumental in our fundraising efforts. And I know I can see a lot of Rotarians on the call today. So I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you guys do around the clock, 365 days a year to spread the ShelterBox word and raise funds. But are we working with any local Rotary clubs on the ground in Haiti this time when it comes to this response?
No, it's a really good question. Yeah, I just want to echo what you said. The Rotary Club is such an important partner for us globally, and in every response we try to involve Rotary in in one way or another. Unfortunately, in this response, we haven't had much interaction with the Rotary Club, not because we haven't they haven't been in contact with us or anything. We have been in contact, especially with the regional body as well. But we have such a strong relationship with Habitat for Humanity, and they had such a strong presence within Haiti that we've just essentially been focusing solely on the partnership with Habitat. There are ways in which we have been able to sort of involve Rotary, but I'm not 100% on what those are and how we've contacted them at the moment. But I'm sure there are ways that they have been contacted. We do like to ensure that they are at all times in every response.
Awesome, cool, thank you. Peter, has a question. Thanks, Peter, for getting in touch and also joining us on the call today. So Henry mentioned pre-positioned aid in Panama, and where are the other hubs around the world?
Yeah, so we have 4 main pre-positioning hubs, but we have other areas where we also kind of keep little bits of aid. So the main ones are Panama. That supports generally the Latin America, Caribbean, North America region. We have our main hub in Dubai, is where we hold the majority of our aid items, and that's because it's got easy access to, well, pretty much everywhere in in Africa and in Southern Asia as well. We have a smaller pre-positioning hub in Belgium, which is a place where we bring together quite a few of our aid items. That's mainly because one of our biggest suppliers is based in Belgium as well. And we also have a smaller pre-positioning hub in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, again, to support the sort of Pacific region. That is much smaller than the others. And then finally, I'll just mention the Philippines as well. So we have an office, a permanent office now, permanent presence in the Philippines, and we have warehousing that holds up to, I think, 4,000 households worth of aid at any time. That is, and that's specifically because we know we're going to be responding in the Philippines every year. So, so we just that's because we have a permanent presence there. We also make sure we have the stock in place there as well, so that distributions can be as rapid as possible.
Cool, that's great. So, I mean, tonight's all about Haiti, and you know, we've really, it's been really brilliant actually hearing more about the response and from the operations perspective of it all. So, thank you, Henry, for joining us. I suppose I have a question. My question is, like, where else is shelter? So Haiti, we're responding in Haiti, but where else are we responding around the world at the same time as this? Could you give us some insight into some of the other responses that are going on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure what it's the media presence for Haiti is like in Australia, but it definitely has been sort of dominant in North America and the UK as sort of the big disaster. And there's actually quite a lot else going on around the world that we're supporting. So we are currently supporting families in the Lake Chad Basin. So there's a lot of that really big kind of conflict and displacement around the Lake Chad Basin in Africa. So that's countries of Cameroon, Nigeria, and Burkina Faso. We have 3 ongoing responses there. Cameroon supporting up to 3,000 households per project, and then rolling into lots of projects. We're on project 9 now. Just finishing project 9 now. We have a project running in Nigeria as well, and a project running in Burkina Faso where aid has just arrived for 1,800 households. Continuing in to the other side of Africa, we have a project ongoing in Ethiopia. So if you've seen probably in the news the Tigray conflict in Ethiopia, huge displacements and a kind of ongoing displacement as well due to conflict there. So we're supporting, I think at the moment, around 3,000 households in that region. Moving south a bit, we've got aid on the water heading towards Mozambique, where 700,000 people have been displaced due to Islamic insurgency in the northern region of Mozambique, and we're supporting 3,000 households out of that. Again, that's probably one of the biggest conflicts or areas of instability that has been seriously overlooked by international media. And then we are currently trying to set up a response in Yemen. There's huge complexities and security considerations around Yemen, and it's been ongoing for so long. So we're trying to set up a project there, but again, that's in its very early development, and it may or may not go ahead based on current sort of looks of things. On top of that, we're monitoring events that are happening all around the world. So every time a storm passes through so currently there's a storm that's about to hit China and South Korea that's just passed around the top part of the Philippines. So we're monitoring that the whole time, ensuring that if there is a need to respond in any of those countries, then we can. I think that pretty much covers our responses at the moment. But yeah, Mike, please chip in if I've forgot one.
There's some ongoing work in Syria, of course, which has dragged on for 9 years. We know we've helped over 50,000 families in Syria. I suppose that now is our largest response, but to a different humanitarian crisis. Hopefully that will come to an end at some stage soon. But yeah, there's always a lot going on that doesn't hit the news. And I suppose going back to Peggy's question about 2,000 families, back in the day, 2,000 families was a big deployment for ShelterBox, because in the scheme of things, with married up against the big actors, we're actually still a small organisation. And nowadays, it's great that the 2,000 families is probably an average of what we help per deployment, 2,000 plus. So that's real progress for us. And like any organisation, budget is our main constraint. So the more money that we can raise, then the more people we can help.
Well, thank you so much, Mike and Henry, for your time this evening. And thank you everyone for joining us. It's been really wonderful hearing all of your questions and putting Mike and Henry under the spotlight to answer them. Has anyone got any further questions for us before we wrap up? If you do, just put them into the comments while we just wait to see if anything else comes through. It's amazing what our community does, and also I suppose just the whole point of ShelterBox supporters is to help us be ready to respond for when disasters like this happen. I think what Henry says, ShelterBox is always monitoring, and so having supporters and loyal Rotary clubs supporting ShelterBox obviously just allows ShelterBox to kind of press the green button when we're able to respond. And there's lots of great ways that obviously you can get involved with ShelterBox Australia, and most of you on this call already are part of a Rotary club or donating regularly. But we also have things like our ShelterBox Australia book club, which is a really fun way to get involved and read some great stories about some of the places and people that ShelterBox has supported, or characters like the people that ShelterBox has supported in the past or right now. Also meet a bit of a community and make a bit of an impact with every page you turn. So that's all on our website. There's also lots of fundraising ways that you can get involved, like pledging your birthday and everything. And if anyone has a question for me about that anytime, you can just Facebook message me or Instagram us or anything like that, and I'll be there to respond. We do have a couple more questions. Jenny, any government help from Jenny? I wonder if anyone wants to.
We in Australia, we don't receive any official government assistance, but look, in the past we have been the beneficiary of the Defence Force and DFAT helping us out with transport when there's a major disaster. So, like for instance, DFAT flew all our aid out to Fiji in 2016 after Cyclone Winston. We worked very closely with the Australian Defence Force following Typhoon Haiyan and other responses in the Philippines, where they had naval ships and assets available. So we've been very good at putting our hands up when that sort of help is on offer, because we tend to have our aid available and ready to move, and we don't have to sort of wait for budgets and things to be approved. But unfortunately, we don't have the funding from government. That it's a bit of a double-edged sword as well, because sometimes with that funding comes a lot of conditions and a lot of reporting. So we're much as we'd love to have some government support to help with our admin costs and things like that, the caveats that go with it can be a little bit restricting. And I think that the same is in the UK and all the other affiliates, that they don't actually receive direct government funding.
Yeah, that's correct. from
Cool.
UK and US perspective.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. That's great. We actually do have one last question from Sue, which I think is a really important one that I would like to get through. Just because, Henry, you were saying in the news, Haiti has been, has had the spotlight on it. Well, here in Australia, it's actually been a little bit different. We did hear about it for a few days, when it was hot, but really the most of our news either has been, Australian focused, or we have been hearing a fair bit about Afghanistan. So Sue's question is about this. Will there be any deployments to Pakistan for displaced people from Afghanistan?
That's a really fantastic question, and is something we've been looking into quite a lot within our teams and monitoring. In terms of deployments, first of all, just to separate the deployment from a response, deployments almost certainly not, just because of the security considerations around sending teams to that part of the world. Aside from that response side of things, we have been looking into whether we can partner with other organizations, or if it's appropriate for us to partner, like, is our aid going to be most appropriate for those situations? How long will it take? Will it be there in a timely way? In a timely way. So it's something we're really looking into. It's going to be a very protracted crisis. It's going to be something that's going on for a long time, such as Yemen and Syria. We're always going to be looking at how we can best support people displaced in Afghanistan and those who have crossed the borders. At the moment, there's nothing confirmed either way. At the moment, it's more of a we're still waiting to find as much information as possible, and to respond in a way that is both safe for any team that we work with, whether it is sending a team or working with a partnering country, and most importantly, safe for the people who will be receiving our aid. That's one of our most important considerations.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much, Henry. And Sue, we will keep you updated with that on social media, and maybe might be able to put something in, a little update in the newsletter or something like that once when it goes out next month. So we'll keep our volunteers and also our community updated on the movements with that. So thank you, both of you, for sharing your insights tonight, and also a massive thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight on the call. We've had around about 40 people here, so that's brilliant. We have some lovely thank you messages. Thanks, Mike and Henry. Great work being done in more locations than just Haiti, which I think is really important to remember. Thanks, David, for that. Paul, Roger, great info night. Well done. Thanks to everyone for attending and supporting ShelterBox. Thank you for Sue. Thank you, and for the clarity on the deployment and the response. Just lots of big thank yous, really. So thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for supporting ShelterBox, and we will hopefully run some of these events again soon, and hopefully we'll see Henry on another call in the not so distant future. But thank you everyone for joining.